Out of all the PS2 launch titles, the original TimeSplitters still remains my favorite. Games like SSX, Summoner, Smuggler's Run, Armored Core 2, Dynasty Warriors 2, Tekken Tag Tournament, Ridge Racer 5, Unreal Tournament, and even Gun Griffin Blaze were all quality launch offerings for the PS2. But the original TimeSplitters is not only the launch title I put the most time in on, but is also one of the PS2 games in general that I've spent the most time with since I got the system. When I first heard that members of the GoldenEye team at Rare had left the company to form Free Radical Design and were working on a game called TimeSplitters, I was immediately excited to play this game. TimeSplitters, aside from Gran Turismo 3, which was a pack-in game for my PS2, was the first PS2 game I owned. But even before that, I borrowed a friend's PS2, swapping my Dreamcast with him for a week or so. I went right out and rented TimeSplitters, meaning this was actually my introduction to the PlayStation 2 system, taken from the back of the game's case.
The TimeSplitters are an evil race, dwelling outside of time and space. Roused from an ancient sleep, they cross the threshold from their shadowy dimension, ripping through the fabric of time itself to make humanity history.
The single-player mode in the game is pretty basic. You can tell that Free Radical rushed the game in order to meet the PS2's launch. There is no story development, and no complex objectives to complete. The single player sees players traversing through the various levels, killing enemies while searching for an artifact. Upon finding the artifact, the TimeSplitters warp into the map, trying to stop you from getting to the exit. Essentially, each single player level is a game of capture the flag, or capture the bag, where players run to the artifact and then run to the exit of the map. As I said, it's a pretty basic concept, but what the single player mode lacks in complexity, it more than makes up for with intensity, as even playing it on easy is very challenging, meaning that sometimes you escape by the skin of your teeth. Each level has its own historical theme, and allows players to choose between a male or female character from that time period. The game has a good sense of humor in its level themes and characters, a series trait that would be carried on to both TimeSplitters sequels. The single-player mode also allows for cooperative play with a friend. The game even carries over the challenge mode ideas from Perfect Dark, where the player has a time limit to complete a certain number of things, like killing 100 ducks, or shooting a certain number of heads off of zombies in a set time limit. That's right, zombie challenge modes. Completing the single-player missions, or the challenge modes, unlock new characters and levels in the mode that is the game's main focus, the multiplayer mode. At its core, TimeSplitters is a multiplayer-focused first-person shooter, and in that regard, it excels. You won't find the fast-paced PC Fragfest style of multiplayer found in games like Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament in TimeSplitters. However, you will find the fast-paced, control-centric style Fragfest that we were first introduced to in games like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. In fact, after playing the entire TimeSplitters series, I have found very little reason to revisit either GoldenEye or Perfect Dark outside of their single-player modes. Considering TimeSplitters' background, though, I consider the entire series to be the true successor to both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and as such, the TimeSplitters series perfected that multiplayer style. The multiplayer goes for the pure, fast-paced arcade feel. What TimeSplitters lacks in tactics and strategy, it makes up for with severe amounts of mayhem on the screen. To best describe the multiplayer, think Perfect Dark on the N64 on steroids. And without the incredibly annoying blur effect whenever you get punched. The modes offered are your standard deathmatch, where you can also turn on up to 4 teams, capture the bag, your typical capture the flag mode, bag tag, where, as in flag tag, the player or team that possesses the bag for the longest amount of time before the timer runs out wins the round, and escort, where, though not as fleshed out as it could have been, teams must protect a VIP who is walking from the start point to the exit from being killed by the other team. There are even 2 unique modes to the game. One of them, Knockout, requires players or teams to find items on the map and carry them back to their spawn over the course of the match, and the team with the most points at the end wins. And Last Stand, where players must defend their bases from multiple waves of enemies who are trying to destroy said bases. Last Stand does not allow computer-controlled bots to help you, but it does allow for split-screen play with friends. All the standard multiplayer modes allow up to 10 bots to fight with or against, even with split screen, meaning there can be a maximum of 14 player matches. That much mayhem can cause some slowdown, but even when TimeSplitters slows down, it still moves faster than your average console shooter. If Free Radical had stopped right there, with the intense single player, the tough challenge modes, and the hectic mayhem of the multiplayer, TimeSplitters would still be my most played and favorite launch title. However, they decided to give TimeSplitters nearly endless replay value by adding a map editor on top of all the other fun modes, meaning that creative gamers could throw away hours upon hours creating and tweaking their multiplayer map creations to perfection. Though the variety in the map editor tiles in the original TimeSplitters pales in comparison to TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect, and it does not allow players to create single-player levels as its sequels do, the original still allows gamers to create the largest multiplayer maps in the series. What it lacks in refinement, it makes up for in sheer size, allowing for larger map creations. The larger mapmaker maps, overall faster game speed, and the ability to set higher kill counts in multiplayer, making for the option of longer games, are really the only 3 advantages the original has over its sequels. TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect improved on the original TimeSplitters in almost every other conceivable manner. I remember when I first got the game, a friend asking the question, if this is PS2, then why doesn't this game look much better than N64 games? My answer was simple. Do you see how fast the game moves? What TimeSplitters lacks in visual luster, having even better looking first-person shooters on the Dreamcast, it more than makes up for in its 60 frames per second frame rate. In fact, Free Radical named the game TimeSplitters because of its immaculate frame rate and speed. They even advertised the game with the slogan saying, "Death never came faster," having someone dressed in a death costume do things like win a swimming race. The game was also a launch title, meaning that its visuals are definitely first gen. TimeSplitters uses a modern setup, where you move with the left stick and look with the right stick. A mechanic that was still not set in stone in console first-person shooter games as of the year 2000. The game is default inverted look, but you can turn look inversion off by pausing the game and going into the control setup menu. For all of you who play console first-person shooter games the wrong way, as in not inverted. You can also turn off the auto-leveling option in the same menu, so your aiming cursor stops automatically moving to the center of the screen every time you move. The game also auto-aims for you, but you can manually aim as well, the controls for which mimic games like GoldenEye in difficulty. TimeSplitters would not get a proper aiming reticule until the third game in the series. Overall though, the controls feel great, and most weapons even have an alternate firing mode handled on the fly by the R1 and R2 buttons. The sound effects from the character grunts and screams to the guns all pop, no pun intended. But the real star of the show is the music. The musical score in TimeSplitters is reminiscent of the scores in both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and it sets the tone for the game nicely. The composer, whose name I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce, previously worked on both games as well as a couple of other rare classics, which explains the similar sound. Overall, the soundtrack is awesome.
Oh boy, am I ready for this?
The only big complaint some may have with the game, aside from the basic single player, are the first generation load times, which can be pretty long, and the fact that TimeSplitters is a blue CD-based game, meaning that some PS2 systems will have trouble reading it. I personally have to tip my PS2 on its side in order for it to read CD-based games. The bottom line, even if TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect surpass the original TimeSplitters in almost every area, the original is still worth a look for series fans. If you became a fan with either of the sequels, you may be put off by TimeSplitters' more simplistic nature, and the lack of a coherent single-player campaign. However, the multiplayer is still as fun as ever, and those still looking for their TimeSplitters fix after completing TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect will still find that classic TimeSplitters feel, and plenty of challenge modes to take up their time. If you want to know how TimeSplitters got its start, look into this one. Also, if you were a fan of GoldenEye and Perfect Dark on the N64, but have never played any of the TimeSplitters games, then this is definitely a series you should look into. The original TimeSplitters, being a PS2 launch title, was only released on the PS2. However, TimeSplitters 2 and TimeSplitters Future Perfect were also released on the GameCube and Xbox.